Morning, everyone. I think we are ready to start this webinar. A warm welcome from my side. My name is Franziska Wende, and I'm working for the Federal Institute for Geosciences and Natural Resources in Germany. And we are one of the organizations who teamed up to organize this webinar today, Groundwater to the Rescue, which is looking at the potential of groundwater for climate adaptation. The webinar was organized by my institution, UNESCO International Hydrological Programme, the International Network of Basin Organizations, the Global Environment Facility, the African Ministers' Council on Water, and the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. I would like to thank all those who were involved in the preparation of the seminar, and another warm thanks goes to IWMI for hosting us today. Just a few remarks at the beginning before we start with the content of the webinar. This webinar will be recorded and made available afterwards. And I would like to ask all of you to pose your questions if you have any through the question and answer tool that Zoom is providing, so we have access to them afterwards. The schedule is very tight, so I'm not sure whether we will be able to tend to all your questions during the seminar. And without much further ado, I would like to give the stage to Dr. Antonio Ciambel, who is the president of the International Association of Hydrogeologists, for an introductory keynote on the fundamentals of groundwater in climate change. Please, Antonio.
Sorry, I need to share the screen, or do you put the screen yourself?
If you could do so, please share your screen.
Okay. Sorry.
Hi, Doctor. I have the video with me. Do you want me to play it?
Sorry, I saw you were going to put it. So
Yeah. Shall I play the video now?
It would be great, yes.
Do you have the video? Yes, if you can pass, because I was not prepared for that. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this meeting for the invitation to pronounce some words concerning groundwater and adaptation to climate change. And thank you too to all the ones that are following this session. Groundwater represents the hidden part of the water resources. It's the most mysterious part of the water cycle, and as it is not directly visible, a source of fears of the unknown that begins with the unreasonable assumption that the groundwater resources are very scarce, but they are not. And well managed, it can be a very safe way to guarantee the survival of a significant part of the world population, namely assuring the food security in most isolated parts of the world. Groundwater infiltrates at the surface of the soil, accumulates into aquifers, and these ones are connected with most part of other water bodies, as lakes, rivers, seas, and oceans. Most part of the time as a water supplier, other times as a water receiver from these other water bodies. Groundwater also crosses borders and needs a good management to continue to have the importance it has and must have also in the future. How can the aquifers be affected by climate change? What will be the consequences for groundwater of this change in climatic conditions? We would say that we expect less infiltration, so fewer renewable resources, and consequently a loss in water quality. But hydrogeologists know that aquifer natural discharges are controlled by natural conditions. Aquifers have discharge points like springs, rivers, lakes, oceans that control the natural flow out of the aquifer and maintains relatively stable the bulk water storage in aquifers. So the question will not be a great loss on the water storage in aquifers, but less availability of renewable resources, less contributions to river flow, etc. And the main problem will be the pressure to get more water from aquifers, as induced issue caused by human activities that we can describe as global change, a consequence of climate change, but also of the continuing growth of world population, more consumption due to better life conditions, etc. Let's see here an example. A spring as discharge point for a phreatic aquifer controls the water stored inside the aquifer. With the reduction of the infiltration, average levels can decrease a little, but the bulk part of water stored is still there. The annual water flow in the spring will be less due to the reduction of the annual precipitation values. The depletion of water in the aquifer will arrive mainly by human factors, when the increasing pressure of the resource on the resource turns the quantity of wells much higher than before, causing overexploitation. In the case of coastal aquifers, the same actions will lead to saltwater intrusion, as can be seen in this slide. With seawater expected to rise, the new water level in the aquifer could create natural conditions for more stored water, but the pressures to use groundwater will create conditions for saltwater intrusion. Managed aquifer recharge can be a partial solution to increment the water on aquifers. In this example, we can see several techniques to recharge aquifer: recharge mounds, small dams, injection wells, bank filtration, and the infiltration waters can be rivers, collected rainwater, or even recycled treated waters from industrial or sewage original systems. So the risks and consequences for groundwater with global change can be less recharge, overexploitation, quality degradation, land subsidence, less water in rivers, degradation of groundwater-dependent ecosystems, less water for human uses, and the advantages are that groundwater is much more resilient than surface water. In general, has better quality than surface water. It's available in practically all areas of the globe and maintains its chemical characteristics and constant temperature all over the year. To secure groundwater resource sustainability under climate change scenarios, a proper management is necessary. For the demand side management, we need to ensure that groundwater withdrawals are revised in alignment with realistic assessments of average renewable resources, conserving environmental discharges and minimizing the dependence of non-renewable groundwater. From the supply side management, we need to promote an appropriate range of recharge enhancement measures, considering potential climate change-induced changes in rainfall patterns and the need to ensure adequate water quality for aquifer recharge. Groundwater is resilient to drought, and the presence of aquifer provides a natural solution for deployment in climate change adaptation. Groundwater management widely requires strategic rethinking to ensure resource reliability for climate change adaptation, with increased investment in conjunctive use, demand-side, supply-side management, and quality protection. The key criteria which determine the potential role an aquifer can play in climate change adaptation are storage availability, supply productivity, natural quality, and pollution vulnerability. Global warming can lead to reduced groundwater recharge, impacting the reserves of slow storage shallow aquifers. In this final slide, you can see an example of the joy of water in Africa. Wells are the contact points where all the news and information pass to all the members of the community. Apart from the resource, the social effect of water is overwhelming in rural communities all around the world. Thank you for your attention. Have a good and successful session.
Thank you for that presentation, Antonio.
I'm sorry. The slides were blurry, but in the original they were very well. So I don't know what happened. I'm sorry for all the people that were informing me that really the slides were not on right conditions. Okay, thank you.
So after this introduction, we would like to have a look at a few practical examples of groundwater and climate adaptation. And the first one comes from a local example. And for this purpose, I would like to give the stage to Professor Wolfgang Kinzelbach, who was professor at ETH Zurich and now is working with the Swiss Development Corporation on a project in northern China. Please, Professor.
Will you play or do I share?
If you're ready to share, maybe it's better if you go ahead and share.
Then I would have to find it first. I'm sorry. Share screen.
I'll play it from here.
Play it,
Okay.
please. That's good. And results from the Sino-Swiss groundwater project. The project is funded jointly by the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation and the Chinese Ministry of Water Resources. It has the title Rehabilitation and Management Strategy for Overpumped Aquifers under a Changing Climate. Overpumping of aquifers due to agricultural irrigation is a global phenomenon. About 1/4 of worldwide abstractions is not sustainable. The North China Plain is a hotspot. If you look at the results of the GRACE mission, you see that there is a considerable mass loss in the North China Plain, the blue area. It is due to groundwater abstraction surpassing recharge. The depletion over the 10 years from 2003 through 2012 is about 80 billion cubic meters, or about twice the storage volume of the Three Gorges Dam. The big volume of an aquifer represents a long-term underground storage. It can be used in the mitigation of climatic extremes, which are increasing with climate change. Water is stored in wet years, while the storage is depleted in periods of drought, quite similar to the functioning of a savings account. This requires management. Recharge and abstraction must be kept in equilibrium in the long-term average. The storage of groundwater can be enhanced if surface water is used preferentially, a practice called conjunctive use. Finally, the aquifer can be recharged artificially if there is excess surface water outside of the irrigation season. The pilot area of the project is Quantao County in Hebei province. The climate is semi-arid and supplementary irrigation is needed. Natural rainfall is insufficient for the double cropping system of winter wheat and summer maize. As precipitation is scarce in winter and spring, winter wheat is the main reason for the overpumping of the aquifer. We focus on the shallow aquifer, which is the primary source for irrigation water. To get into equilibrium, abstraction has to be reduced by 10 to 15%. There are 3 measures available: water saving, irrigation, fallowing of the winter crop, and increased import of surface water. Management is based on 2 principles, the red line concept and the quota system. The lower limit has to be chosen high enough to prevent decline of well yield and the increase of energy cost for pumping. At the same time, it has to provide storage for managing a design drought, which we chose to be a 4-year drought. The quota has to be determined such that the groundwater level stays above the red line. The deal with the farmers is use less overall, but have sufficient water even in drought years. The management comprises 3 modules. The monitoring module determines groundwater levels by automatic observation wells, the pumped volume of wells using the pumping electricity as a proxy, which is then converted to volume by pumping tests, and the land use monitored by satellite remote sensing. The data go to the modeling and decision support module, where water balances are computed and suggestions are made on the 3 measures to contain overpumping: fallowing area of the winter crop, import of surface water, and water saving. The 3rd module is the implementation in the field, which consists of handing out subsidies for fallowing and water saving equipment and collection of water fees for overstepping the quota. The decision support system summarizes the management tools developed. In the first step, it allows to set a groundwater level goal and get advice on how much fallowing would be necessary to reach that goal at given surface water import. Groundwater balances are computed, and the development of groundwater levels in the county is derived for any scenario of measurements chosen. Finally, the system allows to check whether subsidized fallowing has really been carried out in the previous year based on high-resolution satellite imagery. Progress has been made in the last 6 years, mainly through subsidized fallowing of winter wheat. The rate of decline of water levels in the mainly used shallow aquifer has been halved. In the deep aquifer, the rate of decline is unchanged. This will only be solved when sufficient surface water is imported to replace the deep aquifer pumping. The amount of fallowing cannot be increased substantially beyond the present level, as it would contradict the food security policy of China. Water fees for overstepping quota have been calculated based on electricity use converted to water pumped, but they are not yet implemented due to the resistance by the farmers. Present water saving potential is low, as farmers already save water through deficit irrigation. It will increase somewhat as small family farms are merged to large farms which can practice precision agriculture. The final solution of overpumping will come with the prolongation of the central route of the South-North Water Transfer Scheme into Hebei province. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kinselbach. We move on to our next example, which will be the national case of Namibia. And for this, I would like to hand over to Bertram Swartz from the Namibian Ministry for Water, Agriculture and Forestry. Yeah, please, Bertram.
Thank you very much, Francisca, and good morning, everyone. Bertram Swartz is my name. I'm a part of the Ministry of Agriculture, Water and Land Reform within Namibia. And today I would like to give you a short, very short example of adaptation in the Namibian, from the Namibian perspective, just to set the scene a bit. You know, Namibia is the most arid country south of the Sahara. It's got the climate, one of the driest climates in Africa, and only about 2% of the annual rainfall ends up as surface runoff, and a mere 1% goes down for recharge of groundwater. The rainfall in Namibia is low, it's unpredictable, unreliable, it's erratic, and spatially unevenly distributed, as can be seen in this picture. We have been identified as Group B by the Copenhagen climate classification, which is a dry and semi-arid classification. And as can be seen, it stretches across the entire Namibia. This is the climate that we have been dealt with. Now, if you're looking at what our water resources and occurrences and potentials are, Namibia's perennial, or its potential lies in its perennial rivers, which none of them originate within Namibia. They are transboundary water resources, and these sources occur on the borders. So it leaves the internal part of Namibia sort of lacking any perennial rivers. The ephemeral river runoffs are dammed and they supply, but this is subject to and is heavily the demand on it, and also the climatic variations cause severe droughts. The internal of the country and settlements rely on capture of this ephemeral river systems. Namibia has more than 50,000 production boreholes drilled since the early 1900s in moderate to high groundwater potential areas, and also in areas where there's only hope, as can be seen in this groundwater geological map of Namibia. Now, the case that I'd like to talk to you today about is from the central areas of Namibia. The demands for water resources in Namibia is either at urban centers or in agriculture, both communal and commercial farming. This constitutes about 91% of the total demand, and it's risen from 300 million cubic meters per annum in the 2000s to above 600 million cubic meters in 2020. The availability of water is generally a limiting factor to the development in all parts of the country, but particularly in the areas called the central areas of Namibia, which includes the capital, Windhoek. The recent droughts in 2015 and 17 has really put some real strain on water resource and conventional water resources to the central areas of Namibia. And we were forced to look at unconventional methods. Now, groundwater is a conventional method when it comes to water supply in Namibia. Now, as can be seen in this graph, the brown is bore production and water supply to Windhoek. And you can see that the demand since the early 40s has really more than tripled. And unconventional water resources and the water supply was really the key issue. Interbasin transfers from groundwater sources outside of the central areas, as well as aquifer recharge and water banking, was the interventions that really aided in helping Windhoek through what could have been a devastating hydrological drought. So once again, groundwater, although a conventional source within Namibia, was looked towards as the saving grace for the central areas of Namibia and Windhoek in particular. There was a few more slides, but I had to cut. I think that's about the end. It's short. It basically spells out that Namibia, although we have a real demand for groundwater, it's always the saving grace when it comes to in drought years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bertram. A little shout out to all our presenters. You can have a look at the question and answers and the chat. Maybe you are able to give some quick answers already to some of our attendants who have asked some questions. With this, I would like to hand over to Thales from UNESCO, who's going to have a look at a transboundary case of adaptation to climate change and groundwater.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? All good. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'll briefly present you the importance of institutionalizing cooperation for groundwater-based climate adaptation. I'll give an example of the Stockholm Transboundary aquifer system. Well, the Stockholm Transboundary aquifer system is a large aquifer of around almost 90,000 square kilometers shared by Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa. It's mainly a farming area with groundwater use mostly for irrigation. And what is interesting here is that the Stockholm aquifer lies entirely within the Orange Senku River basin. So on your right side, you can see the delineation of the aquifer in orange, and it lies entirely within the Orange Senku River basin, which is in green. And from a policy and legal framework, the Orange Senku River Commission, ORASECOM, was established in 2000 by the governments of Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, and South Africa to promote the equitable and sustainable development and management of water resources within the basin. Well, what happened? What happened in 2017 is that the Council of ORASECOM made a resolution, passed a resolution to nest a governance mechanism for the Stockholm Transboundary aquifer within the structure of this river basin organization. And basically this is quite something because it is the first operational governance mechanism to be nested in a river basin organization, and it fully captures the IWRM approach. Here in this slide, I can just to briefly show you the structure of this mechanism. So what is interesting here is that although it is a river basin organization, what we can see is that there is a groundwater committee, and within this groundwater committee, that's where the mechanism for the governance of this transboundary aquifer was nested. When it comes to groundwater-based climate adaptation, well, the first thing here is that this governance mechanism that was set up for the Stamford aquifer has set a permanent institutionalization of cooperation among the countries sharing this aquifer within an existing structure. No? And what is really important on this is that this governance mechanism for the Stamford transboundary aquifer will generate flow of information and data that will contribute to the river basin's IWRM plan, and in particular, strategic objective number 2, which is climate change adaptation. What are the main takeaway messages here? Well, groundwater is not only about science. Something very important is policy and legal frameworks. When we are working in a regional setting, institutionalizing cooperation is key for sound groundwater governance. And what we can see is that river basin organizations can play a key role to promote groundwater-based climate adaptation. Indeed, what we can see is that many river basin organizations already have climate adaptation plans. However, many of them usually have considered only surface water. But little by little, what we're seeing is that these river basin organizations are increasingly considering the importance of groundwater in their mandate and in their activities. And such activities related to groundwater by river basin organizations can greatly contribute to climate change adaptation plans. For instance, in giving information and hints for setting up managed aquifer recharge schemes and so on. So these were the key takeaway messages of this very short presentation, giving a regional snapshot for in Southern Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thales. Now we would like to discuss the relevance of groundwater for other sectors outside of the traditional groundwater lens. And for this purpose, we have invited a few panelists. For once, Anja Grabicki from the Climate Adaptation Fund, from the Green Climate Fund, where she is Deputy Director for Adaptation. Deepa Mago, who is a manager for water at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and Mr. Meng Wang, who is not only heading the Young Earth Scientists organization, yes, but he's also a geologist working on urban groundwater. And to moderate this panel, we have invited Dr. Richa Aureli from UNESCO IHP.
Hi, hello. Thank you very much, Francisca. I'm delighted to have this great level of experts in the panel and old friends, Anja and in particular and Deepa. And to have Meng to has as a young, fresh look at the groundwater and the climate change adaptation issues, it's definitely an asset. As we have heard from now, I mean, it's definitely that climate change has become an undeniable major pressures on the world's freshwater resources, and that we should make a better effort to know how groundwater has affected by climate change, and how groundwater can really become and play a particular role, a crucial role on adaptation measures. Let me go immediately to the panelists without taking so much time. And if you allow me, I will have a general question to the three ones. What is important is to understand in their different setting, in their responsibility, what is the perception of and the attention given to groundwater, what is the feedback they have in the work they do on groundwater, and if groundwater up to them is taken on board adequately, and if groundwater is linked in the governance, in the actions, in the feedback they have from their stakeholders and their networks, taken into consideration with the role that can play on climate change or not. So this is a general question for all the three. We have only 20 minutes for this panel. Unfortunately, we cannot go too much in detail. I mean, do you have really an impression about the organization work is taking on board groundwater and climate change? Do you have the impression that your stakeholders talks about and understand the groundwater? And what is your opinion about that? This is for the three to answer rapidly. Sorry. Anya, Deepa, Meng. Anya?
Well, thank you for this question, Alice. You know, I think definitely groundwater is still underplayed. I think its significance is still underrepresented and underappreciated by people who are putting together climate projects for submission to the GCF. However, we are seeing a really positive trend in terms of more projects coming through, looking at managed aquifer recharge, for example, to remedy water scarcity that's brought about by climate change, to include conjunctive use of groundwater and surface water. I think there's more and more appreciation that groundwater resources can be orders of magnitude greater than the surface water resources that are available. And so it's a very valuable instrument for adaptation. Having said that, I think there are quite a lot of aspects which represent risks. And sometimes these risks are also not well understood. So for example, pollution risks in terms of the groundwater quality that the aquifer is going to yield, and how useful that can be either for farming application or for water supply for populations. I think there are also risks in terms of the energy use for pumping groundwater. And for an organization like the Green Climate Fund, of course, it's extremely important that the pumping technologies apply clean energy, renewable energy, and not, for example, diesel pump sets. And then finally, of course, I think we're seeing the impact of the COVID crisis intersecting with the climate crisis and impacting climate projects. But in the case of groundwater and water projects in general, into water adaptation, there's a tremendous emphasis, of course, now on water for hygiene and hand washing. That's something that really could be highlighted in projects, and it's very valuable to show that with groundwater projects, even if the groundwater itself is going to be used for agricultural purposes, very often there can be an overall water supply savings. In other words, that there's going to be more water supply than available to inhabitants for water supply and hygiene, such as hand washing. And then finally, of course, the jobs, the increasing number of jobs that can be created by adding in groundwater resources into an adaptation project. So I think that there's a very bright future and an increasing number of groundwater projects coming through. Those are just a few of the areas that I wanted to highlight. a couple of very quick responses to questions that I've already seen from panelists. So Shami Puri asked a question related to the resistance of farmers to change irrigation practices and to start incorporating groundwater or indeed reclaimed water. And what we're finding in the projects is that it's very valuable to incorporate training programs such as the farmer field schools that FAO has been doing all over the world. And then finally to Ralph Klingbeil, the economic impacts. So all GCF projects require economic feasibility studies, and you could have a look at the groundwater projects which have already so far been approved by the fund and see some of the livelihoods improvements and in strict economic terms, how the use of groundwater is affecting poor and vulnerable communities worldwide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anya, and thank you very much for having taken some of the question of the attendees, the participants. I mean, definitely we expect very much from the Green Climate Fund to have more projects on groundwater and groundwater adaptation. So we count on you fully 100%. Deepa, I mean, definitely the World Business Council for Sustainable Development has a crucial role to play in the arena of water sciences and groundwater. I mean, could you highlight how, I mean, companies in your network, in your experience, if or not, are, I mean, feeling the problem, the issue, and if or not are affected by climate change related water problems? Thank you, Deepa.
Yeah, thanks for your question. So very briefly, you know, WBCSD, that's the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, the organization I come from, that works with several businesses globally, which represent different sectors of operations. So, you know, for example, food and beverage sector, there is agriculture sector, there is mining and metals companies, there are water utilities and so on. So there's a whole range of sectors these companies come from, and there is a varied range of sort of dependency of these companies on water. So some of these are extremely water intensive, the others are not so water intensive. And therefore, there is a varied level of risk that groundwater resources in general, I mean, water in general, but also groundwater resources in general pose on these companies. So, I mean, at the very local level, all of these companies, I would say, most of these forward-looking companies understand water extremely well, at least to the extent of knowing what level of risk they face from water, and in particular groundwater availability and groundwater quality, because that has an impact on their operations. We have noted that a lot of companies work at the local level also with groundwater experts to understand what precisely they can do at the local level to manage that risk. And a lot of companies also acknowledge that, you know, water is a shared resource. So they need to work with the other sectors. They need to work with communities. They need to work with cities. They need to work with farmers because water is indeed a shared resource. And if it is scarce, then it is scarce. So I would say there is a fair degree of, acknowledgement of the issue around groundwater availability and quality and the risks that companies face from climate-related water problems.
Thank you very much, Deepa. We could continue to talk about these issues and the role you have and the work you do. It's really crucial in order to spread the message all on this network. I would like now to listen to Mr. Meng Wang, who is the president of the Young Earth Scientist Network and a senior geologist at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And I mean, he has also a particular experience in the governance, in the Ministry of Land and Water in his country. And a particular question to him, many cities depend on groundwater for their daily supply. What is your opinion? I mean, is this sufficiently appreciated by city planners and decision makers in these, large discourse about groundwater and adaptation?
Okay, thank you for your question. Firstly, I want to answer the very general 2 words, answer the general questions. As I remember from my professor when I do my master, my professor, Chinese hydrologist, he said, we are not lake of the waters, we are lake of the clean waters. And another word is about the water and the climate. As Professor Wolfgang said, he did research in China, in the Hebei region. In 600 years ago, this region is very rich of the waters. And that's the city planners put the capital city of Beijing in this region just because the plans have enough waters. But now it's become of the poorest area for the water, especially in Shandong province. Maybe we know. So it's always be a very big challenge for the city planners to design the cities, because that time we never know in the futures. We only know the past. So I want to. This is the second words, and about the third is about the city planners challenge for the using of the waters. I want to share the two cases from China. One is maybe you can see. One is about the Shanghai. We already did several works about the waters issues in Shanghai. The first is a geo research on waters, and the second is a smart network for waters, and it's realized on waters. We already did all geo informations understandings from 2004 for 3D geo modeling in 200 meters deeper for the whole cities. So we put all the informations in the in one map, including the geological information, water informations, all kinds of informations, geo-environment informations. Also, we did a very detailed research in the different layers of the cities. So also it's a real-time modeling for the whole cities. It's a very beautiful. So on the top of this city, we do the smart network for the waters, can be real-time 3D modeling, moderating about the environment, moderating about everything. And we built very big underground facilities and the civil defense works to using the same time using for the water resources and water flood for the whole cities. So this is we from the information for Shanghai we can know we do this is a project I lead right now. Is from the one map, means all information map, and to one network. It's all connection with the different cities, not only Shanghai but around Shanghai. So it's a networking cities. Then we go to the smart and realize that it's one brain for the cities. It means the cities can growing and learning and for the futures. And another case for Beijing is a totally different. So for the planning for the planner city of the city in Beijing is 600 years. Here is a very old capital cities. That time was enough water, but now the water supplement become big issues in Beijing. So we did the south to north water transfer project. It's a long-term project already, and but now we get a very good results. Another is the hazard and waters. As we know, in the 2012, we have a very big rainstorm in Beijing, and a lot of people died, and it's never happened in the last 61 years ago. But after that, we facing the big challenge. So we do a lot of construction. The first is a water supplement solution, and another is a energy solutions. We're using the geothermals and other things. Another is a hazard reduced. We using some examples to reduce the water transportations. So for other cities, for the planners of the cities, we know this year we are, this is one temples we can see in the south part of China, we built the very big water dams to protect the cities, but we still facing very big challenge for the flood. So for the conclusion for these cases, we can see the different cities have different solution on waters. There's no one same solution. So we need to think about a different solution for different cities. So this is really important to understanding well the past, including the history and including the date, but it's not enough. So the city planners for the city is designing for the future, but not the past. There is always the challenge. So we need to engage the data, make the scientific postcast and the decisions with the joint works with the different sectors, including the planners, environment, and other, also the geologists. So this is, I think, my ideas for the city planners in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Meng. Thank you, Anya, and thank you, Deepa. Unfortunately, we have to close the panel due to time constraints. I want only, before to go to Monsieur Eric Tavier and Francisca for the conclusion, I want only to inform that UNESCO, the International Association of Hydrogeologists, and IWRA will organize a 3-day conference from 24 to 26 of October, full on groundwater and climate change. And thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you for this very interesting discussion. And for our closing words, I would like to give the stage to Eric Tavier, who is heading the International Network of Basin Organizations.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Francisca. Thank you, Alice, and thank you to all our panelists. Yes, a few elements of maybe not conclusion, but takeaway messages, as we used to say after this presentation. Keeping in mind, first remark, that climate change is an additional pressure on groundwater resources that combines with other pressures, mainly related to human activities that were pre-existing, and especially in the case of groundwater resources, drinking water supply, and agriculture, as has been mentioned in the different presentations. So groundwater are essential to many economic activities, and that's the reason why we have to tackle these new impacts related to climate change. And then 3 remarks maybe. The first one is that groundwater resources management remain underrepresented in the global allocation of scientific or political attention, and also in terms of adaptation projects, as has been also mentioned. So this is something many of us here have to work on that. And to work on that more concretely, I would suggest 2 different aspects. The first one is that there is always this need for more knowledge about groundwater systems, about more science, new models, and we know that there is a specific complexity of aquifer systems compared with surface water systems. But there is also a need for more data, for more information, for more monitoring systems. And we've had examples about that, early warning systems, about more general monitoring systems. This is what we call here at INPO water information systems. And we need also groundwater information systems, including not only resources, but also water usage related to these resources. So this need for more water information systems. But there is a need not only about science, but also about governance. It has been mentioned also earlier, and I think this is something really important. Groundwater need reinforced water allocation policies, regulations, and also more permanent, institutionalized, and I would say shared mechanisms of cooperation or even decision-making processes, not only in the case of transboundary aquifer systems, but also even in the case of more national aquifer systems, since these resources have to be shared between different types of users. So I would, as my conclusion, strongly support this idea that river basin organizations, so organizations related to surface water resources management, can play a key role in this regard. And that's true that very few of them are now engaged in conjunctive management approaches. And probably this is an important task for many of us here in the future to reinforce this not only scientific but also governance aspect related to groundwater resources management. And that would be my last words. Back to you, Francisca. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Eric. I'm very sorry that we don't have really much time to tend to all the questions that were asked. Some were replied to already in the chat and in the question and answer section. We will look to them, that no question goes unanswered. I would once again like to thank all those who were involved in the preparation of the session, all those who gave presentations and participated in the panel, and also the participants for your resounding interest in our underground topic. Thank you all, and continue to enjoy World Water Week, and have a great day.